On the first season of Love and Justice, we took on the case of 19-year-old Ashley Love. We chased leads, joined forces with law enforcement experts, and knocked on doors. But with her case still open, the files remained sealed, making it nearly impossible to help the authorities deliver justice. This season is different. Now, Love and Justice is back with a new season and a new case. In 2001, 20-year-old Andrew Wieman was found dead in his fraternity dorm room behind a locked door, tucked into bed with 29 stab wounds on his body. Investigators ruled it a suicide. Andrew's family never accepted that determination, and for 25 years, they haven't stopped questioning the case. Now, through official records, requests from the Freedom of Information Act, and years of documentation, we have access to a case that has never been fully examined publicly. And we're going to open it piece by piece. In addition to examining the files, we'll be hearing from the people who lived alongside Andrew, along with new experts who are joining us with fresh eyes 25 years later. Some people will hear about this case and feel the conclusion is obvious. Others will hear the same story and feel something is deeply wrong. That divide is where this podcast begins. This is not a story that unfolds cleanly or comfortably. It is a story that sits at the intersection of grief, investigation, and unanswered questions. How does a death involving 29 stab wounds come to be classified as a suicide? And what really happened to Andrew Wieman? I'm Kyle Olson. This is Love and Justice, and Season 2 starts right now. Andrew Vernon Wieman was born on June 19, 1980, in Glendale, California, and raised in Eureka. He grew up in a close-knit Christian family, with his parents, Wes and Jan, and his younger brother, Dan. In high school, Andrew played varsity soccer, was a member of the limited edition choral group, and founded the weightlifting club. He graduated 5th in his class. After considering furthering his education at West Point, Andrew ultimately decided to attend the University of California, Davis, where he was studying in managerial economics, minoring in Spanish, and carrying a 3.8 GPA. He was a member of the Kappa Sigma fraternity, where he served as treasurer. Among friends, he earned the nickname the Funny Duck, a reflection of his easygoing nature and ability to connect to those around him. But on January 4th, 2001, Andrew was found dead in his fraternity room, tucked into bed with 29 stab wounds on his body. A year later, authorities ruled his death a suicide, and the case was closed. When someone dies unexpectedly, there's an investigation meant to answer a basic question. What happened? In most cases, a conclusion is reached, a determination is made, the file is closed, and on paper, the story is over. But for the people closest to it, it doesn't always feel finished. The questions don't disappear. They come up in conversations, in quiet moments, in the way the story keeps getting told, each time with something that still doesn't quite add up. In this story, suicide is a conclusion that never settled with those who knew Andrew best. Friends of Andrew's, like Scott Carroll, questioned it from the very beginning.
To this day, I won't believe it. There's no way that would ever be the outcome for him.
Andrew's high school girlfriend, Kristen, also couldn't believe it then, and still doesn't believe it now.
I literally could not believe it. It's so confusing. It's impossible. I mean, really, truly. I didn't believe it from the moment they said it. I thought there's no possible way. I have not spoke to a single person who thinks this is accurate. Like every person that I've spoke to, if they were at Davis, if they were from Eureka, they believe that this is not a suicide. I had friends who went to school at Davis at the time. They were like, this is not Andrew. There's no way he would have done this. I don't believe anybody has that narrative except for the people who wanted to close the case and get rid of it.
Andrew's parents also felt something was off. Right from the start, they hired a private, board-certified forensic pathologist to perform a second autopsy on Andrew's body.
There was no doubt in our mind that he was killed. It wasn't suicide.
And Frank knew Andrew because Andrew dated his daughter. And he suggested that we call someone who would do an autopsy for us, our own private one. We would pay for it. So that's what we did.
I can figure it out. I know he didn't kill himself. Anybody that's got a half a brain and knows anything about physiology, you can't do that. And you never changed my mind on that.
We didn't know the ins and outs and what we were facing whatsoever. So we hired the person that was recommended. And when it was decided that he would come out and do it, and when they would release the body for him to do that, then that's when it happened. We wanted a second opinion, and we really weren't getting what we felt we needed at the time. And we hired a private investigator as well.
Not only did Andrew's parents hire a lawyer, a private investigator, and an independent forensic pathologist, they also made a decision early on to bury their son instead of having him cremated.
That's why we didn't have him cremated. We were going to. And we pulled the order and said, okay, we're burying him in case we need his body dug up. And we were willing to do that.
That's not a decision someone makes lightly. Wes and Jan changed how they laid their son to rest because some part of them refused to accept that the door had closed. Because what was officially determined didn't feel like the whole truth, and they wanted to leave room to prove it. For 25 years, that door has stayed open. For 25 years, no one has walked through it, though the questions from family and friends have only multiplied. So now the question for me becomes, do I step through the door? I first heard about Andrew's case from my friend Haley, who I met when I was making season 1. When she started telling me this story, the headlines alone were enough to grab my attention. 29 stab wounds. Ruled a suicide? It reminded me of Ellen Greenberg, a Philadelphia schoolteacher found dead in 2011 with 20 stab wounds, whose death was also famously ruled a suicide. And yet, I hesitated. In season 1, we ran into a lot of walls. Missing records, limited access, people who didn't want to talk. Dead ends that left us with more questions than answers. When you search Andrew's case online, almost nothing comes up, because this happened in 2001, before news outlets were regularly publishing to the web. It's a story that exists mostly in paper, in memory, and in the people who were there. I was afraid the same would be true here. But the case is closed, which meant the files weren't locked away forever. Through FOIA requests, public records, and the help of some researchers, I started pulling documents. And what I found wasn't a lack of information. It was almost overwhelming. Hundreds of pages of reports, files, and records that have never been fully examined together. And that changed everything, because it meant there was a real opportunity to revisit the case with fresh eyes. So I built a team that I could trust, all with backgrounds in major Hollywood productions like myself. I brought in Alexa, who, like me, has a family in law enforcement. Between my dad and members of her family, we have people that we can go to, people who understand this world in a way that we don't. It gave us a sounding board and a helpful place to start to test ideas and ask questions. Then, I brought in my friend Lisa, who quickly stepped into the role of a research producer and learned these case files like the back of her hand. It didn't take long before she knew the material better than the rest of us combined. I also pulled in a few other collaborators that I've worked with over the years. We are not investigators by trade, but what's powerful about the team we've built is a shared commitment to storytelling, to advocacy, and to doing the work carefully. Before we really got started, I drove up to Northern California to spend a weekend with Andrew's brother, Dan, and his wife, Carly. This wasn't a quick coffee or lunch, but a full weekend. Both days looked the same. I'd come over after breakfast and we'd sit together, talking, asking questions, and going through files. We'd break for lunch, and then we'd pick it right back up again. We had dinner together in the evenings, and then went out to watch the sunset from their house on a hill overlooking the valley. Dan and Carly had multiple boxes that had been sitting virtually untouched for 25 years. Inside were handwritten notes and printed emails that Wes and Jan had saved. Andrew's parents had held on to everything, not knowing if any of it would ever matter to anyone outside of the family. Sitting there going through it all, I couldn't help but think about that. 25 years of waiting. By the time I got in the car to drive home on Sunday, I knew two things. The first was that there was a real story here. And the second was that I needed to call Lisa and Alexa.
I could not go to bed at night not knowing the why or what happened. Like, not being able to fill in those pieces would weigh beyond heavily on me. And I cannot imagine how a family would wait this long just to be able to kind of not close a chapter, because I don't think that chapter ever really closes, but maybe the chapter does. But the book, it's still like an ongoing kind of story for them. But I think helping someone find closure, being able to heal that small part, I think for the family, at least from what you've said, Kyle, a lot of it is just, yes, they want answers, but I think they don't want his name tainted as well. As a mom, because that's the only way I can look at it, I think, like, through their lens, I would do the exact same thing. I wouldn't, if someone had this awful thing to say about my child and I truly did not believe it, I would do every single thing in my power. Whether the outcome is the way it is, I need you to believe that this person was not troubled, that this person was a good soul. And maybe, the outcome was unfortunately the way the family cannot believe it is, but then I want to know why. How did we get there?
Totally, Alexa. Yeah, I feel like our ages position us close to how old Andrew was then and how old he would have been today. And I don't think we're too far off from that experience, like the experience he was having in college. I remember what it was like to be 20, 21 years old and living in a dorm environment and balancing that social life and academic life. And I'm in a different chapter of life now, but I feel connected to him still. And I don't think my age would really change how I would navigate this situation if it were my friend or family member. I ask myself, like, how would I want my friend to be talked about years after the fact? And what would I do if I was in this situation? And I kind of want to put that emphasis in this case and, treat Andrew as if it was my own family. So I think that's why this is so personal to me.
I agree.
Yeah, I also agree. You know, for me, season 1 was a story about a family friend, Ashley Love. And Ashley was my friend. And I think having that perspective gives me a deeply personal understanding of what unresolved cases leave behind. And it's tough when you can't get the answers and the clarity that you've been searching for. And I think ultimately that's what I hope that this podcast is going to be able to help with this season. That group chat kickoff made me want to dive in immediately. So I did what felt logical. I started Googling people of interest, pulled the phone numbers from the reports and case files, and I got to work. Or so I thought.
You have reached a number that has been disconnected or is no longer in service.
25 years is a long time. I knew that, but nothing drove it home quite like a string of disconnected numbers. When Andrew died in 2001, George W. Bush had just taken office.
My fellow Americans.
September 11th hadn't happened yet.
Just crashed into the World Trade Center here.
People were still on dial-up internet. AOL was how you got online, if you got online.
You got mail.
We primarily used floppy disks. There was no iPhone, no Instagram, and no Google Maps. The first iPod wouldn't come out until October of that year.
We're producing a product today, and that product is called iPod.
The early 2000s? They were a different time. So where do we dive in? We started with the files. We went in thinking there would be a clear investigative through line, documented reasoning, a sequence that explained how they got to suicide. We figured it would be one of two ways. Either the evidence pointed cleanly to suicide and the family, understandably, couldn't accept it, or there were obvious signs of foul play that had somehow been missed. We expected the documentation to point somewhere. But the more Lisa and I dug through files from agency after agency, the more questions started piling up. Not answers. Questions. So Lisa and I got on a call. Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
Oh, I'm good. I'm excited.
Yeah.
A little overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But
A little overwhelmed is probably an understatement. I mean, I've got a pile of papers here. There's way more than I've printed out, and I have both seen the amount of files that we have. Some of it's organized, some of it desperately needs to be even more well organized than it is. I am overwhelmed and like drowning in paperwork that is like literally thousands of pages is a lot. So many places to potentially start, but something I'm trying to wrap my head around is it looks like we have documents from multiple agencies, like multiple agencies were involved. Is that your understanding of this?
yeah, the primary agencies I've gathered were the campus police, Yolo County Sheriff's Department, including the coroner's office, and the Department of Justice working collectively together on this. I think the FBI was briefly involved at one point, more in a civil rights capacity.
Yeah.
Nothing really came of that. And then, of course, like September 11th happened. So I think that also stalled things.
Right. 3 main agencies. And then, like you said, I'm also seeing there's a little bit from the FBI. When I was up talking with the Wieman family, they had mentioned that the FBI had gotten involved for a brief moment in the investigation. And this was, if I remember right, it was August. So it was like a month or so before 9/11. And then, of course, September 11th happens, and they immediately saw a huge shift, and in some ways, understandably so, I suppose, in priorities within the FBI. And as far as the family recalls, that was kind of the last time they really deeply engaged with the FBI when this was an active investigation. All that essentially, to summarize, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, which can bring about a lot of questions and concerns if we're looking at this from the family's perspective. As you do your initial kind of scans, realizing that we haven't dug that deep into any of this yet, but as you're kind of looking through things, as I'm kind of looking through things, I'm curious to gain and have a conversation about what has stood out to you so far. Where are the areas that maybe we're interested in taking a bit of a deep dive, the rabbit holes to explore, that sort of thing? What is standing out to you right now?
There was a 60-hour gap between when Andrew was last seen and when his body was discovered. So New Year's Day, he's recovering from New Year's Eve, etc. He's hanging out with the fraternity brothers, and he's hanging out with the fraternity brothers until about 1 a.m. on January 2nd, 2001. His body was discovered by fraternity brothers on January 4th, 2001 at 1 p.m. And between when he went to bed in the wee hours of the second and when he was found, there are no sightings of Andrew. Like, what happened in those 60 hours?
So that I have my context straight, this came right after they got back from the New Year's Eve in Tahoe, right?
Right.
60 hours is a long time. Yeah, we hear about shows that talk about like the first 48 hours. 60 hours. There's part of me that says, okay, there's some context to bring to this because this was still over the holiday break. Not everybody was at the fraternity house. People were coming and going, partying, having sleepovers, what have you. So in some light, maybe it's not as crazy as it would be if they were like in the middle of a school week and he was missing for 60 hours. But still, for no one to have any sort of anything for 60 hours is a bit jarring and a bit curious.
And just based on what we know so far about his personality, it was very uncharacteristic not to check in with his brothers, and he was super social. But yeah, that is my big question. What happened in those 60 hours?
Yeah, boy. Okay, that's a good first impression and first look at things that stood out. Some of the things that first stood out to me are almost completely different from the. I didn't even, quite frankly, realize the time gap. When I started looking at things, one of the first questions I had is, why was campus police so deeply involved in this?
Yeah, I mean, in looking at UC Davis campus police getting involved so early, like, we can acknowledge that this fraternity housing, which was kind of an apartment style, like the students pay to live there, but it was on campus. Okay, so it's UC Davis campus police's jurisdiction.
It's their jurisdiction,
but like,
for sure.
But I would be curious about statistics, like what are the types of cases they're typically, dealing with? What is the size of the department? How many detectives do they have? Like, what motivations did they have to figure out a case like this and to be involved with it? And
did they want to take on this case, or did they try to give it over to the city of Davis, and city of Davis was like, nope, your jurisdiction, this is on you guys, which, could be a perspective as well. Again, there's so many questions here, but I'm curious as to all of that.
Yeah. One of the things I've done so far is try to look at press at the time and, what's going on in campus culture, what else is happening in press at the time. And there might have been some pressure on the campus police.
To ease the public worry?
Yeah. And their persona at the time. So to look more into that, I think would be important too. So, I don't know. There's definitely feels like there were some shortcomings in the investigation. And just trying to piece it together. And, if anything, as I read through it, I am trying to just ask questions as I go through and kind of figure out where we start. So definitely that 60-hour gap is sort of mind-boggling. you're bringing up the campus police. I think as I go through this, I'm not an expert, so talking to experts,
Yeah, talking to
I'm
experts
really
is a good
interested
idea.
in. Yeah, yeah, and I've downloaded a few like guides from Department of Justice, police organizations that outline crime scene investigation or scene investigation and this step-by-step expectations as you go through it. And while I'm still familiarizing myself with that, like, wondering were these steps followed? You shared with me the 911 call and the actual words he used. I wonder how that influenced the actual dispatch to first responders, leading them in a particular direction, which I'm trying to remember, but he was like, there's a guy here who cut his wrists. And then he kind of takes a step back and says, who has his wrist cut? And so how did that affect what first responders were walking into? And I think they may have been coming in already with a bias towards suicide. And how did that affect their next steps? And
is
handling
that
the
something
scene?
that often happen? Like, this is where I'll
Right.
have to, we should talk to experts. We can talk to people in, my family, Alexa's family as well, as to like, there are going to be times where you get a call where there's an inherent bias as you're arriving at the scene. And sometimes that's a correct assumption. And sometimes that is an incorrect assumption. And how does that
Yeah.
play into things? And no, that's a valid point.
And maybe what does it demonstrate about how equipped they were to handle this type of scene?
Okay. I also have a question around, and this kind of circles around that as well. There's nothing in here that talks about authorities shutting down the house when this happened. I need to learn some more and perhaps talk to some experts. But there's nothing, I'm seeing first responder reports. I see a lot of activity happening, obviously, in Andrew's room where he was found and where this incident presumably took place. I see nothing about the rest of the fraternity house. I see nothing about, the frat brothers couldn't sleep there that night. They shut down the kitchen. They shut down the common areas. They shut down the bathroom, which to me makes me wonder, not even the bathroom? Like, did they look in there? I realize that some of the bedrooms, they might need warrants or something, or like volunteered cooperation. So like, I understand there's some nuance there for sure. But like, as an outsider hearing this for the first time, you hear a dead body was found in a kid's fraternity dorm room. And then you see that, and all the guys went to bed in their other rooms in the same house that night. I don't want to say as if nothing happened, because obviously something had happened, and I'm sure that, jolted all of them in many ways. But like, it just seems weird and it seems off. And again, maybe that's protocol. And maybe we talk to some law enforcement folks and they say, yeah, no, that's pretty typical, that if there was a murder in an apartment complex, they wouldn't shut down the entire apartment complex, would they? They would only, shut down that particular apartment, presumably, assuming that there wasn't evidence to the contrary that they should shut down the entire complex, right?
Yeah.
In this case, because it's a fraternity house, because it's under campus jurisdiction, again, there's just some nuance and some questions around it that I don't know, but I'm interested to look into, because I have a hard time wrapping my head around the idea that the authorities came in, they did their little investigation, they locked the door, they put some crime scene tape on it, and they said, okay, have a good night, boys. And the rest of them were just there to kind of coexist. That feels weird. It does feel weird.
I mean, at a first glance, looking at what we have from police reports, I'm just surprised. I don't see anything addressing the actual physical structure. I think there's a mention of maybe ruling out the hallway, or like specimen in the hallway right outside of Andrew's room. But I haven't been able to find any report about securing the common areas, asking for voluntary evidence. I think separating the fraternity brothers, I think some of the police interviews happened days later.
Okay, I'd like to play a quick game, if we can, of devil's advocate, because one of the things that I think we all kind of agreed on early on is that I want to make sure that we're looking at all sides equally, fairly, sort of thing. When you first hear about this case, you immediately go, whoa, that doesn't sound right. But for a second, can we talk about, from our initial look here, Are there any compelling arguments that lean suicide versus any immediately compelling arguments that lean homicide? I think for starters, a note was found. The investigation shows that it was Andrew's handwriting, but I also know that we've talked to some people already that say it might have been Andrew's handwriting, but they don't feel like it was his voice. And as we dive into this note, I think we will also have a question around who is that note that he wrote really addressed to? The note itself is written in a very interesting way that makes me wonder who the note was written to. Second, as we continue this kind of devil's advocate approach, I think timing here plays a part in this conversation. This death happened over the holidays. I think sometimes you hear about a suicide that happened over the holidays, and it's a story we've all kind of heard at some point, and I think that does have to be a part of this conversation. Were the holidays impacting Andrew in a way that maybe he felt like he couldn't go on and that he was in a really tough, dark place? And that's going to be something we're going to dive into, I think, as we start talking to people.
Yeah. I didn't even think of that yet. But yeah.
So those are some kind of arguments that might make one say, okay, maybe it was a suicide, right? That said, though, when I was talking to Dan and Carly, when I went up north to visit with them last week, I remember that Dan had a fairly compelling argument kind of against suicide.
Which wound would you do first? Would you stab yourself in the chest twice? Would you cut your throat? Which one would you do first? Sober, of course. Knowing that you're going to do this, which one would you do first? No hesitation marks. Which one would you do first? I think that needs to resonate with everybody.
What Dan said, I think, brings up a valid point here, and it's something that we need to ultimately investigate, is can you fatally stab yourself multiple times?
Right.
Also, kind of related to that is the idea of feasibility, I guess. Right. Not even looking at just the fatal wounds, because there were multiple fatal wounds, but there were 29 stab wounds. Is it even logistically, scientifically, mathematically possible for someone to stab themselves 29 times? Mm. Or after the 15th stab wound, is that no longer a possibility because anatomy, science, and otherwise tells us that that's not possible,
Right. I think you're leaning towards this forensic viewpoint or analysis. Right. And I think I lean more towards the psychiatric or the psychological of is it feasible? Is it possible from a psychological perspective, or what would that entail?
And part of that is what you would classify as like victimology, right? And then there's also just psychological, which also kind of is a subset or an addition to that. But this also brings up a good point, which is when Andrew was found, and I don't know the answer to this yet because I don't think I've seen this yet, so maybe you've seen this. Was he sober?
Yes, he was sober. No antidepressants, no benzos, no psychotropic drugs. I think his toxicology came back for a B complex vitamin. And I think it was maybe very low percentage of a carbon monoxide marker, which so far seems to be leaning towards, okay, he occasionally smoked marijuana, and it was probably in line with that. But as far as central nervous system depressants or alcohol or any other maybe mind-altering drug, he was clean.
So that brings up an even bigger question then in my mind, which is, can someone stab themselves 29 times whilst sober? How big was the knife?
So I think in total it was about 9 inches, handle about 5, and the edge of the knife was about 3.5 inches. I think it was described as a hunting knife.
Give me 2 seconds. I'm just going to travel to my kitchen real quick. Hold on. For those of you that are listening and not able to see this, So
The way you had those in between your fingers.
a little Edward Scissorhandsy, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay, I have brought back with me some knives from my kitchen. Now, I realize you just said they were hunting knives, but like, I think just to give us a general idea, you said the blade was approximately, I have a measuring tape here as well. You said blade was approximately 3 inches, handle was about 5 inches. Is that give or take?
Yes, I think 3.5.
Okay, so then so it's funny. I'm looking at 3 knives in front of me right now, and the tiniest one is probably the closest to what you just described. Like I brought another one because I was like, oh no, this is probably too small. And again, I realize this is not the exact type of knife because this is a kitchen knife and we're talking about a hunting knife, so it would have had a very different handle. But like the handle takes up the most of this, right? That's about 5 inches.
Yeah.
If I put this down, this is almost 5 inches on the mark. And then the blade is 3.5 inches. So as I hold this, like this, obviously, like we all know that knives can do damage regardless of how big they are. But like, as I sit here and hold this knife in my hand, it's a relatively small knife, but it's still a sharp freaking knife.
Yeah.
The thought of me stabbing myself with this knife whilst sober 29 times? All this to say, it sounds like we need to learn some things about knives.
Right.
Okay, we've talked about some of the compelling arguments that lean suicide. What are compelling arguments that lean homicide or just not suicide?
As I'm taking in the more official reports from these agencies, one of them from the DOJ has some photos, which are helpful. They are 25 years old and were probably shot on 35 millimeter film, but they have painted more of a picture for me to ask some questions. What I gathered from the DOJ report, they were making a strong case for the ultimate determination. So every single picture was accompanied by an explanation for why it was leaning towards the determination the coroner's office made. But as I was reading through it, I was like, we're looking at a room with blood smears on the east and south walls. There is a floor lamp knocked over into a mirror, kind of a branded, etched brewery mirror, like Andrew seemed to collect beer bottles from breweries back in Eureka. And he also had this mirror up on a wall that appeared to be broken from this floor lamp that was knocked over. There was blood smear. It was described as a schmear. Below that, there was a rather large plant, maybe a 3-foot plant with blood on the plant. I think there was even described as there was a blood pattern on the floor lamp. Ultimately, it looked like they could not pull any fingerprints from that, even though because there was too much blood or it was smeared in a way that they couldn't gather if that was Andrew's or someone else's. All to say, at least in that corner of the room, things were out of place. I've spent some time now just trying to visualize if somebody was doing to themselves. What were the movements in the room? And these smears were away from the bed he was ultimately found in. Well, it looked almost to everybody that the comforter was gently placed over him. There was one Nike shoe, allegedly one of his brand new shoes from the Christmas break, that was found. It did have blood on it, but only one was recovered from the room. Like, where is the other shoe? Where's the other shoe? There's a picture with a Nike box on his computer chair. And if the family acquired everything in that room and there was still no other shoe, what happened? Was he moved there after death? His shoe was left somewhere else.
Okay, that's all very interesting. Disruptions in the room make one question, how could somebody do this by themselves? Being tucked into bed makes one question. I also think motive becomes a thing that eventually we're going to have to talk about, which is If it wasn't suicide, then why would somebody have been coming after Andrew? Why would somebody want Andrew dead? I talked to Andrew's parents, Wes and Jan, about their thoughts on motive, and they kind of circle around one theory.
He was in charge of the fraternity finances.
He's the treasurer.
There was never enough money for food at the end of the month because they were buying drugs with the money.
And the people buying the drugs were the people in the fraternity that Andrew was a part of.
Yes.
And Andrew
He had a problem with that. He wasn't one that would tolerate something like that. He was worried about something, but he wouldn't tell us what he was worried about. He wasn't sleeping, though, because he was so worried about it.
Yeah, it's important to ask these questions. Then sometimes I'm like, am I speculating, pointing fingers? And what we're doing is just asking questions and trying to leave no stone unturned here. And when I think about the fraternity and potentially like being a more senior person in the frat house, just to take a step outside of this, I don't have any experience being in Greek life or
yeah, you and me both.
at a but curious of what their traditions are and what it means to be in Kappa Sigma and any rituals, and how was Kappa Sigma received on campus. What were some of the behaviors of other groups on campus? UC Davis obviously has the reputation of being an incredible academic school, athletic, Division I, etc. Also curious just what was campus life at the time and what was campus life for Greek life at the time. And was Andrew seeing any behaviors that didn't align with his values and beliefs? He was an amazing student and Christian, and it sounded like he loved to have fun too and get into tomfoolery with friends as well. But just curious if there was anything he saw, he was a part of, or experienced that didn't align with his values that was causing him some distress.
Which gets into the psychology that we've talked
Yeah.
about a
Yeah.
lot. Was that an aha moment of sorts for Andrew? Or, did he just see something? Did he experience something? Did he overhear something?
Yeah.
Was he worried about something?
Right.
Did he think someone's coming for him? Yeah, I mean, there's so many questions that you can pose from that one interaction, but a standout interaction, no doubt.
I'm curious about the happenings leading up to New Year's and Tahoe and what happened in the weeks before his death. Any ominous things? Like so far in interviews, it seems like those who knew him most were grasping at straws to find something that Andrew might have been upset about. So we're throwing out some ideas, like maybe there was conflict with the girlfriend, and somebody else would be like, no, they were amazing together. Like it was new, it was fresh, he was so excited about it. Or it's like, oh, maybe religion came into play here and, was maybe embarrassed about behaviors at school or something. Then somebody would just completely negate it, weigh in and say, no, he was totally comfortable in himself and he led others, by the way, within his confidence and whatnot. But I do think about, had he seen something? Did he know something? Or was there something more internal happening at the time?
All good questions. What do you think our job is or should be as we begin the second season of the podcast?
I really want to be as thorough as possible. So far, I've been taken on a journey that's led me in both directions, and I understand the suspiciousness of the case, why the family is pursuing it, and the importance of getting this story out there. And on top of that, want to be thorough in asking the questions and taking people on this journey, and maybe they'll experience the same questions with us, and hopefully we can inspire feedback or change, or people reaching out, help us to learn and uncover more. I mean, can we uncover more evidence in this process that could get the authorities to take another look at this?
Your goals I think here align very much with mine. I think about that line from A Few Good Men, I want the truth, and sometimes people, you can't handle the truth, but it's like, no, in this case, we do want the truth. And I want the truth, whatever that means. And I want to figure out what that truth is. But I also do hope for justice for Andrew and his family. This is something that for 25 years, Andrew's family has been living with this disbelief, this doubt, questions that swirl in their mind, all this kind of, at the risk of sounding like a complete cliche, does go into why we named this podcast Love and Justice. There is so much love surrounding the people that we highlight and showcase on this. In season 1, it was Ashley, whose name also happened to be Ashley Love. But in season 2, the reason I decided we're not going to change the title is because that love still drives people towards the answers. That love still motivates families to not give up on a case and to try looking one more time and to try uncovering those stones. And, that is a very beautiful thing. And the justice that comes from this can come in many different forms, I think. That can come in reopening and re-examining a case. That can come from bringing new light to Andrew's story and his legacy. There's a lot of different ways that I think justice can kind of show itself, but it would be really interesting to go back and talk to people that knew him and see what stands out, because, the cream always rises to the top, and there are some things that even when you deal or go through a difficult or traumatic situation, you will never forget. And so I imagine the people that knew Andrew will have things that they'll never forget, that it'd be interesting to learn that perspectives in interviews. So I'm hoping that we can get a lot of that as well.
Yeah, I hope so too.
During that weekend that I spent in Northern California, after dinner one night, Dan picked up his guitar and he played a song that he wrote nearly 25 years ago.
Man, I honestly haven't sang this song in so long. It was a regular old Thursday. There is really nothing else for me to say. The men came up to my front door. Who knew that my life would be changed forevermore? I thought I had done something wrong. But then again, that's not why I'm singing this sad, sad song. I heard there was some bad news, the kind of news that I wouldn't choose to hear. Stars in heaven talking with the moon, and I know the one that I'll see him soon.
I asked Dan, what made you willing to do this? To open up to something this painful, this personal, and put it all out there?
I have a 1-year-old son now, and so it kind of really struck me as we really have to do something to show our son that we did everything we could to figure out what happened to Andrew, the uncle that he's never going to get to meet, the funny duck, my big bro. And I think that him not ever getting to experience the kind of person that Andrew was, it's heartbreaking. I miss my brother, I don't get to tell him about me having, the love of my life and having a baby. It's hard because, you go through these moments of like every so many years. It's like, man, I really want to do this. And when, how? I mean, I don't have the resources. I don't have the time now. I'm dad. I got to be here and I got to be present, and I love being able to do that. So That's been my priority, but given the opportunity to share Andrew's story and to, tell the world about him, I love it. I love being able to tell people about him. When Carly and I were talking about doing this or not doing this, it was just like, we really owe it to Andrew and our family to do what we can. And if sharing the story and bringing it back up and talking a lot about it, which has been a little odd, a little weird, brings back a lot of emotions and frustrations. And it's just, you get stuck in this spiral of like saying the same thing over and over again and like getting frustrated and getting mad. And like, it's weird still to not have him here. And if ever anything I could say to my brother, I'd just say, like, I love you, I miss you, I wonder where Andrew would be today and what he would be doing. He would surely want for me to go on. Love he had is shown through my song.
Yeah, so I will get the documents organized for you, hopefully work out a timeline based on all those dates. I think we need to look at Andrew's victimology. When we talk about a timeline, learning like what happened in the weeks before his death, what happened in Tahoe. I think that is where I'm going to be focusing on, and I look forward to what we can find out there.
Our first step, I want to know everything I can learn about Andrew so that we can have a full, fleshed out victimology. And then my next immediate focus, I think you're right. I think it goes immediately to what happened over the holiday break.
Yeah, what the heck happened in Tahoe?
What happened in Tahoe? On the next episode of Love and Justice, what happened in Tahoe?
I wake up and it's dark out, and I open my eyes and he's on his bed and he's looking at me when I wake up.
Like staring at you?
He was like staring at me, yeah. I open my eyes and he's just staring at me. It was weird, and it's haunting, and it's something that I'll never forget.
Love and Justice is an official production of Magic Lamp Productions and is primarily recorded in California. This episode was executive produced and hosted by me, Kyle Olson. Supervising producer, Alexa Lopez. Producer, Lisa Visione. Edited by Cody Crabb. Special thanks to Natalie Izquierdo. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and rate it 5 stars. Every single review greatly helps our exposure and helps us share Andrew's story with a larger audience. So please rate this podcast and share it with your friends today. If you have a tip, question, or thought, please call our hotline at 209-764-5683. That's 209-764-LOVE. Until next time, thanks for listening.